Bostrom Ministries. Beginning January 2018, Bostrom Ministries engaged in a whole new assignment by entering the airwaves of the world. Don't miss Ken and Mary Bostrom Ministries live.
Hey, thank you for being with me today. This is part 2 of the Shemittah 7-year land rest. And so I want to get you familiar of what's coming this upcoming year. Now, the first program we did, you can go back and look in on Ken Bostrom Ministries YouTube channel, and we will be able to show you how God absolutely talked about the Sabbath and how serious it was once he started the cycle of his prophetic. And so we're coming, and so what we're talking about now, first we talked about the Sabbath for people, but we're talking about the land. And God is really serious about the land rest. And so you'll have to go back and look at that, what we said about it. But underneath, the kings, they were letting this land rest. Every 7 years it was going good. From once Joshua came into the land and the land was divided between the tribes, they were commanded by God to let the land rest every 7 years. And they did, and that's why they had such bountiful crops. Under Saul, King Saul, David, Solomon, and the kings of the divided nation, the land did not ever get the 7-year rest. Total, they reigned altogether 490 years. And then Jeremiah prophesied that the Jews would be in captivity for 7 years to let the land rest. They were specifically kept, that's how serious God is. They were kept in captivity 70 years to let the land rest. 70 times 7 is 490 years. 70 years times 7 years for the land. It was 490 years total that they did not let the land rest. That's amazing to me. 2 Chronicles 36:21. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah until the land enjoyed her Sabbaths, as long as she lay desolate and kept her Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. That is, no, you know what I was wondering as I was looking at this? God is calling the land she. Why is God calling the land she and not the? Because God created the land to continue to produce. And women produce babies, they produce milk, even cattle, the women cattle produce the babies, they produce the milk. And this land, God made it to produce, but God created the same he did with human people, that they needed to have a time of rest. And so Daniel's 490 years. So Daniel 9:2, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books and the number of years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet, we just looked at that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolation of Jerusalem. And so he went fasting and praying, and he fasted and prayed. And then by verse 24, he got the word, 70 weeks. 70 weeks. Now listen, they were in captivity for 70 weeks, but God is using that 70 weeks as an example for end times. You know, all things in the Old Testament are written down for examples for those who live in the last days. And this is the 490 years is it really lines up with Daniel's 490 years. 70 weeks. Now this is, A week is a week of years. It just means 7. 7 years is a week of years, basically is what it means in Hebrew. And 70 weeks are determined for your people. Now, who's that? That's a Jewish people. He's talking to Daniel. And for your holy city, what city is that? That's Jerusalem. They were in Babylon. Daniel was in Babylon in Persia when he got this. So 70 weeks or 70 years are determined, weeks of years, are determined for your people and your holy city to finish a transgression, to make an end of sins, to make a reconciliation of iniquity, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision of prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So let's look at that. Let's look at this. I just want to bring this. I'm going to go back and forth with this slide here. So the first one is we're looking at Daniel's 70th week. So if you look in your Bible at Daniel 9, 24 through 27, you're going to see the weeks line up. So let's look here, continue in verse 25. No one understand this. No one understand this basically is yada yada. From the proclamation of the year to restore and rebuild Jerusalem to the arrival of the anointed ruler, that's Jesus, it's capitalized, there will be 7 weeks of time. For 62 weeks of time, the community will be restored, the city rebuilt, and the broad streets and deep defenses, even through times of trouble. Now, so 70 weeks is 49 years. That's 7 times 7, 49 years. So let's look at this. Did that happen? Yes. For 49 years, the 7 weeks, 49 years, they rebuilt Jerusalem. That is when they rebuilt Jerusalem. And here we have verse 26. After those 62 weeks of time, here's 62 weeks of time. Let's go back to this one. That's 434. 434. This was after Jerusalem was rebuilt up until the time from Jesus to his crucifixion includes the 62 weeks. After those 62 weeks of time, the anointed one, Jesus, will be cut down, crucified, and have nothing. And the warriors of the prince who come will destroy the city and defile the sanctuary. That was since 70 AD. Its end will come swiftly as a flood, and there will be war. The decree is issued, desolation. That's from the Voice translation. Now cut down, this is the crucifixion. So when we come into the next verse, the 27. Now the prince, do you notice it does not have a capital letter here? This is talking about the Antichrist. This is talking about end times. The prince will make a binding treaty with many people for 1 week of time. That's 7 years. In the middle of that time, he will stop. Middle of it is mid-trib, 3.5 years. In the middle of the period, he'll put a stop to all the sacrifices and offerings to the Lord. Now, wait a minute here. Between verse 26 and 27, from 70 AD, wait a minute, the Antichrist is not, we don't see him ruling yet. That is because, look here, there's a gap. Their church age came in. Nobody knew about this church age but God. And God put in this time, but guess what? They haven't finished the week yet, the 490 years. They have only 489 years that listed here. The last week is called the tribulation, and that will finish the law. So the closer we get to the tribulation, it's like if I was going to be going to Minnesota, which I am in a couple of days, we're flying, but if we're going to be driving, when we leave here, we know that we're going to Minnesota to see our children, our grandchildren, but there wouldn't be any signs. But the closer we get to Minnesota, the more signs there are, the bigger they are, the more the more information is given on the signs, the more it's talking about that destination. And it's exactly what's happening now. People are starting to understand the Jewish calendar. They're understanding the times of God. They're understanding the signs in the heavens. And guess what? The last signs in the heavens in 2014, 2015, guess what? That was a Shemittah year. That was a land rest. And so the last week is to confirm the covenant. So let's go back to this. We're talking about the Antichrist here. In the middle of one period, he'll put a stop to all sacrifices and offerings to the Lord. And at the height of his atrocity, he will set up an abominable idol that desecrates the most holy place until the desolation decreed is finally poured out for the defiler. Now that is talking about the last days. Now here I want to show you the 7 days, because 2 Peter 3:8 says, but beloved, do not forget this one thing. God doesn't want you to be ignorant about this, that the Lord one day is with the Lord 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. There's a Sabbath for week, there's a Sabbath for month, there's a Sabbath for years, there's a Sabbath for the feast. And so let's look here. The first 2,000 years, these were the days of chaos from Adam to Abraham. The next 2,000 years, it's the time of the Torah. This is the time of Moses. This is from the prophets and Abraham all the way to Jesus. And then we come to Jesus being cut off. And here you have, it's been 2,000 years, give or take a year, that since Jesus came. And so here, what is that line there? That line there? There is going to be, that is the tribulation that's going to come between the church age and the last 1,000 years. The last 1,000 years is a millennial reign of Jesus Christ upon this earth. And he is coming back to this earth. Do not be ignorant of that one thing. Jesus is coming back. Jesus is coming back. And so this lays out the 7 days of the same 7 days as creation is what God is doing here. And so we're coming up to this upcoming year of 5782. It starts at sundown because their days start at sundown because God started creation at sundown. And it was the evening, and then it was day, and it was the first day. And it was evening, it was day, it was the second day. And then it was evening, and then it was day, and it's the third day. It's always darkest before the dawn. And so God always wants you to rest. He wants you to rest before you labor. He wants you to rest at night before you labor. And that day on the Hebrew calendar, and it falls a different day on our calendar every year. But this year it's on September 7th. Now also this year it begins a leap year. A leap year has 13 months in it instead of 12. And so this has a lot of different names to it. It's called Yom Teruah, which is the blowing of the trumpets. It's called the Feast of Trumpets. It's called Rosh Hashanah, which is head of the year. This is my Rosh, it's my head. Rosh Hashanah, head of the year. And so that feast, the Feast of Trumpets, is a 2-day feast. You know why? Because no man knows the day or the hour. They had back then, before they had NASA and all these computers and everything, they would have to put people, 2 witnesses up on top of a mountain, and they would spot the first sliver of the month, of the month. And when they saw that sliver, they would start a bonfire on top of the mountain, and then they would start blowing the trumpets, and they'd start bonfires on top of mountains and blowing of trumpets to announce the new year has begun. But it had to be 2 days because no man knows the day or the hour. There's so many idioms in the New Testament that have to do with the Feast of Trumpets. You know, all the other feasts look back into what happened in Exodus, but the Feast of Trumpet looks forward. It does not have a history. It just has a command to blow the trumpets. And so the Shemittah year prophecy, back in 2000, the year 2000 AD, the Orthodox Jews were studying the Shemittah year prophecy. Now remember, that's a 7th year. Every 7 year, the last year is called the Shemittah year. It's the 7th year, the year of ceasing from working the land. So the Feast of Trumpets, let's look back at this. On 9/11/1999, this year, they said, this is the year that everything changes and the beginning of the judgment of the nations. Now, the judgment of the nations is, they said that's what's going to be happening that year. So in 2000, on the Feast of Trumpets, remember Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year, on that Rosh Hashanah, that was the day that that Ariel Sharon, Israel Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, and you know, Billy Brims talks about this because she was with him before he did this. And he went up to the Temple Mount. And Jews are not supposed to go up to the Temple Mount and pray, read the Bible, or anything. And him as Prime Minister went up to the Temple Mount and spoke out loud. He read the entire chapter of Ezekiel 37, which talks about the restoration of the land, of the people. And he read it aloud. And that started a jihad. It started a holy war and began the war cycle. Remember, in 1999, it said, that was the year everything changed. The next year, on exactly the same day, started the Jihad Holy War. And so here we have, in 9/29/2000, began the 7th year of the Shemitah cycle, the year of the land's release. Now, 9/11/2001, this was the terrorist attack of the World Trade Center in New York City. And you're wondering, what does that have to do with the Shemitah cycle? And what does that have to do with us? Because we're not farmers. Well, there was people in Israel that weren't farmers either, but they suffered because of that year. And God wants us to understand that year. So when the terrorist attack hit the World Trade Center, they had to close down the stock markets. They had to close them down for 6 days. So on Monday, on 9/17/01, they opened up the stock markets again. And when they closed the stock market that day, it was minus 684 points, which was an entire 7% loss. That was major in the land. I'm just giving you some examples from our current times so you can understand that this is affecting Israel, not just affecting Israel. This is starting to affect the world. Now, because we had been a world power, I don't think right now we're as much as a world power as we used to be, but because we were the world power, that affected the entire world. The entire world went into crisis at that time. As the new year began in Israel, the United States closed on Elul 29. That is the last day of the 7th year. Now that day is called the day of the Lord's release. Now in the year 2000, that was also called the day of the Lord's release. And events leading up to that Shemitah year, remember that there's going to be things that are going to be leading up to it. Events leading to the end of that Shemitah year, and those of you that are of my age, well, I think most everybody pretty much, not the little kids, they don't remember the World Trade Center, but I remember being at work at the Church of the Living God in Galveston. And I had this tiny little TV in my cubicle, and I turned it on and I watched the plane go into that. Do you know that that God had warned intercessors that he was going to do that. And they walked the floor, they cried, they prayed, they pleaded for mercy for this nation. And he told them, it can't be stopped, it's gone too far. But it can be lessened. And guess what? It can be lessened. And so in that, there was always 50,000 people. Let's go back to that screen. There was always 50,000 people in the World Trade Center at one time, and the planes and the Pentagon, and one of the planes that did crash, that they defended the nation and took the plane down. That was headed for the White House. There should have been about 75,000 people that died on that day, but a little over 3,000 people died. It's still a lot of people, but yet it's not what could have been, because God had people praying, and that's in 2001. So 7 years later, here we come, another Shemittah year, was 2008. So the events leading up to the 2008 Shemittah year, Sunday 9/7/08, the government seized Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac. Remember that, the mortgage companies? On Thursday, 9/11/08 was 7th anniversary of the World Trade Center collapse. Monday, 9/15/08 was the Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy, which is the largest in U.S. history. And then when the market closed, the Dow Jones took its greatest dive, 777, minus 777. I've got a chart here going all the way back to the Shemittah year in 1901 and 1902. And it said here on 2008, the Shemittah year, 50% on 2008, 50% of the U.S. stock market value was wiped out, and it started a global recession. I know people that lost their entire retirement and they had to go back to work. And so this year, as this year closes, now let's go back to 2008. So that was the Shemittah year. The next Shemittah year was 2014, 2015. That was the 4 blood moons, which I believe was a warning to come of what we're going to be coming into, what we are coming into. And so this year, 2021, on September 7th, it begins the 7th year. Now here is what Rabbi Kahn wrote about this in his book, The Mystery of the Shemittah. Now he has an updated one. It's got 5 chapters added to it, which includes 2014, 2015, the Shemittah year. But look what he says, because this is talking about this fall in September. This is pointing to that. He wrote, the Shemitah's opening can mark the beginning of a change or a shifting of a momentum. At the same time, if a change or shifting should take place at this point, more often than not, it tends to constitute a first fruit, a foreshadow of what lies ahead, a subtle trace in comparison to what comes at the end. If there's a change at this point, its coming may or may not be noticeable at first. The general pattern is this: as the Shemittah progresses, as the year progresses, from this September to next September, and particularly as it nears its end, intensity increases. Now, the day of the Lord's release next year will be September 25th, 2022. So let's look at what happened to me in 2008, because I had no idea. This is one of those things that when you read the Bible in a year, you have to read it and you kind of gloss over it and it doesn't mean a whole lot to you. The land rest, I'm not a farmer, what does that have to do with me? But this is talking about judgment. This is talking about judgment. And Isaiah, I was taking communion at my kitchen table in January of 2008. And the Lord spoke to me and said, no longer will you take communion for yourself, but for your cluster. I'm going like, what does that mean? And he brought me to Isaiah 65:8. When the new wine is found in the cluster, and one says, do not destroy it, for a blessing is in it, so I will do for my servant's sake, that I may not destroy them all. Now, harvesting grapes is around Rosh Hashanah, on the fall of the year. This is what is harvested in Israel at that time are grapes. Now, so I started taking it really seriously because God was serious about it. And so you have this huge cluster of grapes, and I don't have it with me today, but if one grape in there is righteous, he will not destroy the entire cluster for the sake of that one person. That's like Abraham said to God, will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? And he starts with 50 and it goes down, and he got down to 10. Will you destroy the entire city if there's 10 righteous people in there? And that's where it stopped. Abraham thought certainly that, they figured that Sodom was at a minimum of 10,000 people. 10 righteous people standing for the city, praying for the city, can save a wicked city of 10,000. Okay, that is an example for us today. And so in the summer of that year, God had me doing praying for Israel, the election in America, 2 hours on Tuesday. And I would always bring the ladies in and say, we're gonna take communion for our cluster. And so we did. And that was the year that the stock market fell on the day of the Lord's release, and it was minus 777, which is God's perfect number. And that's the day that the mortgage industry just catered. Banks were going under. Mortgage lending companies were going under. And guess what? The stock market was, took a huge loss. But guess what? None of the people that we prayed for lost anything. In fact, instead of losing, they were promoted or they got raises, different things like that. See, you can stand in the gap for your family. You can stand in the gap for your cluster, anyone that you love. And so I've got a lot of material on that on our website, KenBostromMinistries.org. And so I'd love to have you go to the web store if you want to email me. Mary@KenBostromMinistries.org. And so thank you for being with me today. I'm going to have more about this next program. God bless you. Bye-bye.